Hi, Bentley.
Hey, Mark Antoine.
How are you?
Doing okay.
Joe.
My video started up.
Oh, and my camera's off. Okay, better.
How are you guys?
Good. How are you, Joel?
Good. I've just been doing a bunch of prototyping with just different back-end options still. But I'm almost done. I feel like I've learned a lot with like API frameworks and hosting options and stuff. But yeah.
Sorry,
made a lot of-
what was the backend you're working on? Sorry.
Oh, so I just did like a basic CRUD fully through with Nest.js is like a JS API framework, and Next.js is backend as well. Those are the two with a couple different. I was also trying a couple different ORMs, like Drizzle is like a new one, Type ORM is like an old one. Prisma is a new hot one, but I have some doubts about that one. Yeah,
I don't know my JavaScript ORMs nearly as much as I know my Python ones. So
yeah, it seems like there's a surprising amount of variance in like their quality.
Oh God, yes, it's true in any world. But ORMs are hard doing because basically it's an impedance mismatch almost by definition. Relational model and the object model don't map well, and you can do various approximations. And if you do it too abstractly, you don't leverage the database facilities for ORM, which can be a problem.
Yeah, I really like at my previous work, I had used Rails, and they have Active Record as like a really nice ORM that has like very good. I guess the interface is really nice when you don't want to write raw SQL, but like if it doesn't happen to be powerful enough, it's really easy to throw in like the raw pieces. It seems like that, like of the ones I've tried of JavaScript, they're just like all inferior in some way. But that's they also Ruby also doesn't have like static typing, so there's some, I think, difference there that like all the JavaScript ones I've looked into, I like made a clear point of wanting it to be like fully typed with queries and return results and stuff.
Yeah, I was just listening to a podcast, and they were lamenting that there isn't a JavaScript replacement for Rails, or that Active Record still seems to be something, and several other things where it's as easy as that.
Interesting. I haven't used the Rails. I haven't learned Ruby. I heard great things about it, but I don't know how good it is.
People still talk about how quick it is to develop. I don't know if it's long-term sustainability on large projects. I haven't heard whether people had to move off of it after get to a certain level of complexity, but
I'm still in love with SQL Alchemy, but it's certainly more on the flexibility side than the easy learning curve side.
Gotcha. Is that a Python?
Yeah, that's the Python. Okay. Yeah. And it's still my favorite after years of looking at others. I was like, nope, can't do that. But you can tune SQL Alchemy to do really precise stuff. It's amazing. But,
So Joel, what are you leaning towards right now? Or are you choosing between two, or have you decided?
I'm pretty sure I'm going to use Next.js for the backend with its serverless functions to handle the API. What was the main? I think the main thing is that like the alternative that I was considering is Nest, which like a lot of it is like very object oriented and class based, and like there's a lot of object-oriented patterns that are a little more complicated to understand, like dependency injection and well, I don't know, like dependency injection is and like module management that I feel are like I don't know, as like an open source project, I want it to be like easy enough to learn, and I feel like those things add a lot of complexity, whereas the Next.js backend is like much simpler. There's it's more function based rather than like class based, so maybe by using dependency injection you gain a lot of like benefits if you take the effort to understand it. They use like decorators, class and like method decorators to like add a lot of functionality, but I feel like it's like hard to follow if you're new to it. Whereas Next.js backend, everything is like explicitly, like to add like middleware or something to like an API route, you do like route dot is off and then dot, handle whatever, and it just like you can go to that is off method and see exactly what it does, and it's there's no like question of where is this getting injected or like where is it coming from. And so
that was actually my problem with Ruby. It's so good at DSLs that people did a lot of DSL, and you often have no clue what's going on unless you.
I completely agree. I completely agree.
It's yeah.
What's worse with Ruby is that there's not easy typing, so like you can't just go to definition of like the DSL to see like what it's doing. You have to like look up documentation, or I don't know. I worked with Ruby for like 3 or 4 years, and it was always like a big pain point that go to definition was not like a easily or like a solidly implemented thing in any of the IDEs.
Right.
So
yeah, the limitation, like the decorators are easier that way, but I understand how they can become a DSL of its own. Like the decorators should be very clear, otherwise don't do it. But it's also true that I've used dependency injection. For me, it's natural because I come from the OO school of programming, and I'm trying to wean myself from it because it's got pros and cons, but it still comes naturally to me. But it's true that I've seen abuse of decorators, obscure decorators, as opposed to just decorator does this.
It's funny that we talk about dependency injection like it's coupled with OO, but
no, it's different.
Yeah, I use dependency injection a lot in my kind of functional style. Although I'm probably more data transfer objects than objects.
Right.
So I never put my function logic with the object itself.
Oh, I see.
But that's easier in JavaScript because you have an auto conversion to JSON and back if you don't. So
yep.
But it adds complexity in other places, right? There's no perfect solution.
There's no perfect solution. I must say I'm very fond of languages that have multiple dispatch because they make some of these things so much easier.
Well, JavaScript has them all. They're just badly implemented and poorly named.
Wait, when you say multiple dispatch,
I don't think it has multiple.
What do you mean
dispatch.
by that?
Multiple like, what? Say that again. I thought you meant like functional and class.
No, multiple dispatch is when you can...
I misheard.
Yeah. It's when you... It's a notion that you... In a lot of OO languages, when you send a message, you call a function an object, the implementation will depend on the class of the object you call the function on. It's called simple dispatch because the choice of method to the message, if you're using the proper terminology, like calling the function is sending a message to the object. And the choice of method, bit of code, depends on the receiver of the message. In multiple dispatch, you look at the arguments of all the parameters. There's not a single point of polymorphism. Like you can say, here's my function, it has 3 parameters, And here's what happens when parameter A is of this class, and here's what happens when parameter C is of this class, and here's what happens in this word combination of A and B being of those subclasses. So it's Julia has that. It's it allows amazing modularity. Like if you want to do reusable you get much more reusability if you have multiple dispatch than if you have single dispatch. Python has it, but it's not well implemented. I don't think JavaScript has it at all.
I mean, you can implement it, but
you can implement it over Python. It's being done a lot. There's a lot of great implementations that exist.
Yeah, and you could implement it over JavaScript because without too much trouble, because it allows you to, if you make a call, you can intercept it on an object and do whatever you want. But that would add a lot of, it's not native. C# has probably not, they just have overrides, which is similar, but probably not the same, because you're talking about where it calls something different if depending on the values. That's not built in. They do have types, and if you have a different type, it'll call a different function. But
and actually there's even I'm trying to remember. There's even a notion, there's something called rule-based dispatch. It's, here's the method to call when this object has this parameter to this value, and you can have, instead of conditionals, you can put a lot of the conditional logic in the dispatcher. And in a good multiple dispatch library, the dispatcher will even optimize the decision tree for you. It says, okay, here are all the variants of that method, and here's how to do the test quickly so that I'll arrive at the method. Sorry, I'll arrive at the right method in minimal number of steps.
And is it dangerous that you'll get that the caller of that library would not be able to have a mental model of what they're trying to accomplish? Or I guess that's the danger of all types.
That's always a danger. That's always a danger. Yes, it requires discipline, so you don't do that. But as I said, the real benefit is when, often when you're providing a library, you have multiple points of variation, and it's good to be able to provide those at the at a very basic level. It replaces a lot of templating. Of course, not as efficient as templating, say, in Rust or whatever, or Haskell, but it is much easier to play with. And as I said, Julia managed to make it ridiculously efficient. The Julia ecosystem is famous for good interaction between independent libraries. Like, people make this library, that library, and they call one another, and they co-evolve, and it just works. It's one great quality of Julia.
I see on the multiple dispatch Wikipedia page, Julia is listed as the only language with it as a primary paradigm, and there are other languages that kind of supported, but not as a primary paradigm. Just interesting. I actually have never seen the Julia. Well, I haven't seen the concept or Julia. So I'm curious to just see a couple code snippets.
I think actually this is one of my very few Wikipedia edits. I mentioned the reg library in the multiple dispatch article.
Wow. Reg?
Yeah, reg is when I said there's some very good multiple dispatch libraries in Python, I was referring to reg.
I see.
Oh, plum dispatches looks interesting. Look at it. It came later.
Does anyone want to see my visualization explorations for the reason score math?
Yeah, it would be more topical. We're rambling.
Yeah.
Which is not not.
No, go ahead. by all
see.
means.
Okay, my whole screen just went blank. There we go. Share screen. Something is wrong with my UI. There we go. So
Hmm,
I was
pretty, anyway.
working, yeah, yeah, it looks prettier than it is. I was working on, that it's this reason score is a simple way to just assuming claims are true, and it's only what's been added to the system, how to kind of like manage weighting by adding and removing evidence and reasons and stuff like that. So visualizing how it might work. And so this is one thing I've been playing with is like, if this parent claim here has 3 pros, purples are pro, orange are cons, or it's 2 different teams actually. Then and this top one and this bottom one have some other claims that aren't visible, making it to where they're not 100%. That's why they have this kind of gray border to it to make it more visible that it's not taking up the complete space. It's not 100%. And
Once again, what do you mean by not 100%?
the confidence level, or it could be
Okay, so those claims
importance.
are considered have their own pros and
Like they're
their
kind
own
of
doubt
weaker
factor.
if there's
Yeah.
like more cons to it or something.
Weaker's probably a great way to say it. They're weaker for some reason that's not on the screen at the moment. Yeah. And
Okay.
I'm probably going to end up going like I have more down here where it's the same color, because when it disappears, it has like no weight in the argument because it's deemed irrelevant. I still want to show the line and to know what it is. But I was just playing with different UI stuff. So actually, I guess this one down here is probably the more recent one. And then these are, normally I don't think I'll even like show all this. All these may just go to one spot and then come out, and people can intuit, just looking at what's going in and what's coming out. I think most of the time that they'll be okay with it, but I want to be able to display the, visualization of how the math works, in case for when people do want to see it. So it's when it's expanded, these are kind of the 4 steps that the system goes through to do the math. And I can explain if anyone wants to go into them, but the important one is kind of this canceling out bit, to where however much cons there are, it takes the weight away from the pros. So for that, I was working on several different and I've been working on this for years. Several different visualized ways to say, hey, these things are attacking and one's canceling it out. The best kind of analogy that I can't use because it's probably politically incorrect is if you have 2 armies coming in and you take the whole number of combatants, there's 1,000 combatants, 25 of them are on the orange team and 75 are on the purple team, and they're all perfectly matched. So then you would end up having 50% of purple left and 0 orange in theory. So I'm working on both a better verbal analogy, because war analogies are not great, and then just visual analogies. Like this one, it's pretty neat because you can see it's kind of blocking the purple. And this one kind of shows them, is a more stronger block. But I'm probably leaning to D or F. The problem with F is that it looks like the purple is, it is intentionally going off and attacking it. And this is based on some Sankey diagrams that actually had arrows, which is kind of interesting. Anyways, we can dig into that. But what I might want to just show you real quick is I'm also working on a using a React flow to visualize this. And so I'm starting to have it to where it shows the
Nice.
the math in there, and you'll be able to drag. I don't have the dragging working, but you'll be able to drag points and stuff like that. So that'll be fun.
That's impressive.
Huh.
Let me go back to the image. what I would probably do instead, if it were me, and I don't know if it's good, because I'm not a, I do visual design, but yeah, I'm less experienced than you in that field. Still, I would keep both flows. I don't know, like have, hey, this one has purple and orange, except I'd have one of them kind of washed out if it's the weaker one, until it gets, and in proportion to how much it's being outnumbered. If they're close to equal, they'd be both 50-50. If they're, if one is overwhelming the other, I'd have the second one washed out by, say, 90 in proportion. But then you'd always have the idea that, well, there are reasons to doubt. They've been kind of overwhelmed, but they're not absent. And you'd always have the same total thickness. So that would be my
Wait.
way of playing it.
I'm having a hard time visualizing that. Do you mean like you would still have the orange, like in this case where you have more
Yes.
purple, like you would just have the orange sliver
Yep.
next to the
Purple
just
in
like
the output.
smaller.
In the output.
Okay.
Like instead of having a gray sheath around it, have an orange byline. And then the orange byline says, well, here's the element of doubt. Now, it depends. And this is where I'd like to convey more information. And this has been, is the counter argument negating the argument or actually arguing against the next point? And that's really, it depends, right? You see what I'm saying? Is it weakening the argument, or is it also attacking the next point? Because you don't want to give the idea that, hey, this provides an argument against the original point if it doesn't. So that's the only problem with the including orange, because it's, oh, this is giving a given signal. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. If it's a deciding factor, yeah, you want both streams of purple and orange. If it's an additional factor that might be neutralized, then you want to show, well, it's always positive, but maybe neutralized. It's not, I wouldn't use it. I would color code that differently. And then maybe the gray is a good choice. But for me, these are totally different cases. There's an added semantics. That said, without that semantics, I still think it's interesting to say, it's, and again, this is about, is the line intended to express the believability of the argument or the strength of the argument? Like probably the orange just attacks the believability of the argument. So it could be a strong but unbelievable argument, as opposed to, oh, it weakens the argument. And again, for me, these are real differences.
So can we put those in like truth versus relevance? Because I'm getting a little, or is that a separate? Okay, so yeah, there's times that you're attacking truth and times you're attacking the relevance. I have done visualizations where it keeps the orange with the purple.
Okay.
And it definitely does exist in some situations and not others. So I will, yeah, I'll have to think through that again. And there, at some point in my explorations, I stopped doing that. I can't remember if I had a good reason or if it would just made the visualizations a little simpler. But it might be data loss. But I'm trying to think of in the math, I think at each parent thing, I don't keep a record of the orange going past this point. I think I can derive it. I think it does exist. But I don't actually need it any further up. So it doesn't inherently exist in how I'm doing the math. Now, also, Marc Antoine, I'm also doing a very simple mathematical model, and it's also
We
possible
did
that some of
that
those
many
cases
times.
may be something I just haven't implemented yet. And later on, when we do an XOR, logic gate, we'll need that. But
Let's thinking about, I think I said truth relevant. I said yes to truth relevance, but I think there's another factor here. The case where, is it a necessary condition? It's necessity. Like if the precondition is a necessary precondition, and then you're attacking its truth, then you're actually attacking the truth of the consequent.
yeah, so yeah, definitely right now, my system is just doesn't take that
handle. Okay,
yeah,
so
necessary or sufficient or
I understand. So what we're doing is saying all the orange does is weaken the opposite stream, and it doesn't become, and then the orange would actually be a bad signal to give. Like if the orange doesn't and possibly independently give a reason to disbelieve the consequent, then you don't want to transmit the orange. I said I would transmit the orange, but again, only if it makes sense. That is only if it attacks the consequent.
I think I'll probably do another experimentation in that vein and see if there's a reason not to include it.
There's, let me think more.
I don't know if Joel or Carl has any questions or feedback or anything, or other topics also. While Marc Antoine's thinking.
Well, I guess one clarification. So this is like each layer is gonna simplify to like the one color in this. Like this is just one layer of simplification that we're looking at.
Yeah, this is one node with children nodes, so it's one kind of argument. Yeah, and then right now as it is, the width of this 100% here is the same width as this line coming out of it. So it's always scales back down to 1. I was talking to someone else and they kind of like the idea of actually having these get smaller. So if this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each of these would then be 1/5 of this final thickness. Or another way of looking at it, that this step that I have that I call scale to 1 wouldn't happen. So these would stay just as thick over here. They'd attack and then it'd come out, and then you'd have to zoom in to read text. That one I might explore later on, but also that kind of means it might be really hard to see the whole thing laid out, because they disappear really quickly. They get small quickly. But yeah, it's a scaling. That's one of the challenges with the visualization, is that the sense of scale is not very well expressed.
What really, really always bothers me in these is oh yeah, all these premises are equally important. No, and you're only dealing with the believability of each premise.
Well, we do handle different.
Yeah, I know.
Different importance in this.
How?
Well, so when we're attacking this, these over here, it can attack truth or relevance. And if it's doing relevance, then in theory, this whole line would be skinnier. It would be less relevant to not existing.
Oh, that's interesting. So what you're saying is there's 2 percentages. There's a percent, like the whole line would become smaller, the gray would become smaller because the relevance is being attacked.
Yeah, the way I do it, there's what I call confidence, which is what a lot of people call truth, relevance, which and then kind of importance, which is the combination of those two.
Which I think would vary again. It may be something else. But yeah, the problem with important. Okay, think of a financial decision. Then the importance is basically expected revenue. Doesn't up to 100%. It's just additive, right?
think for situations like that, you wouldn't need this.
Fair enough. You may decide it's out of scope.
If you have another mathematical model that'll give you an answer, then use it. This is for things that don't. And this only works for like a Boolean decision, go or no go. Yeah, so there are things that won't apply.
That's a perfectly fine answer.
But we do
I
kind of have importance. So
but I understand the belief in important, well, importance, it's not importance, it's the kind of maybe being technical, I'd call it expectation, right? The relevance in a way is you're using relevance attacks to decrease relevance. And
another
to decrease, yeah, go ahead.
Another word is kind of like impact. How is this? If you take a look at the relevance and the truthfulness, then those two things affect the impact it has on its parent.
But it's the expected impact.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah,
it's its total potential impact, which will then be averaged in with all the other impacts of all the other claims. It's another way to say it. I just use importance because as a shorthand, I not only say that this is less relevant, I have a way of saying this is more relevant than everything else. And then it has more than 100% impact.
yeah, my
That's a cheat. That's not.
It's, yeah, I really like seeing expectation because it shows that it's, most expected. It's an expectation. People could be wrong. There could be a black swan, and the black swan could be extremely important. And for me, like a black swan, and it's really the question about black swans, right? Black swans are extremely high impact, considered unlikely, expected to be unlikely, but when they happen, they have huge impact. You're not going to plan for all black swans, and that's understandable, but that's a choice based on expectations. And I think it's very important to convey, well, we are making that decision to not care about the black swan because we don't think it'll happen, which could be legit, but our calculations are off if it does. And this is why expectations makes it explicit that it's about, you're gambling. We're all gambling, and it's fine, but better be aware that you're gambling.
I think for a lot of people's minds, expectations does not imply a gamble. I mean, it does, but it doesn't imply a strong gamble. Like, I expect this to happen means 99.99%.
Yeah,
common terminology.
Yeah, that's and that's what I want people to convey. It does not take black swans into account. Whereas impact or importance,
I just don't think if we use the word expectations that will come to people's minds.
Maybe listen, it is absolutely true that my understanding of the word expectation has been colored by mathematical training.
Yeah.
There, I'm with you.
But that's a good point for a nuance that's important to convey is that, I mean, although this thing has a bigger hole in it than that, I mean, this is just the things that we know about. Like, there's a black swan we don't even know about, right? This doesn't have any concept of unknown unknowns.
Yeah,
and it doesn't even have like 5 minutes later in the argument when we bring a new person in. So I need to have the wording around this being, this is not something to be blindly trusted. Somewhere is an important thing to convey.
Absolutely. It's an algorithm. But at least it's a transparent one, which is big gain over quite a few other algorithms.
Yeah. Carl?
It's sorry, I came a little late, so I might have missed the introduction, but I was wondering what the goal of the visualization is. Like, is it for a single person to get straight, their consensus on a bunch of arguments? Is it for a tightly knit group, like a group that can communicate closely and come to consensus over an understanding? And motivating my question is that I don't see how this visualization can handle disagreement, like with people just don't agree that, say, orange cancels out purple in this situation. Like, it seems like they just couldn't benefit from using the same chart. But yeah, so
let me tackle those. So the hope is that this visualization is untethered to the number of people in the type of group, but there's, I plan on lots of different visualizations. So this is one exploration, and this one specifically is for an explainer video that's going to be a recap of a fictional debate where two teams are going at it, and as they add evidence or reasons, they put it in there, the flow changes, and you see the outcoming score. So this is used in a short video, kind of like a sports center, where they go, okay, in last night's game, here were the important hits and the thing. So this would be an explainer for that.
But does
That's
that
for sure.
imply that it's like curated, like someone is picking
Hmm.
the numbers and stuff? It's not like
Yeah,
Like there
random
kind of
term
needs to be a
setter.
judge who determines like, oh yeah, that convinces me. Because sometimes
well,
people,
but there's no judging.
well, but who determines whether orange cancels out purple? Because sometimes people say, you didn't just cancel me out. And they're like, yeah, I did.
Okay, so that's one of the, I didn't explain this now, but the one of the core concepts is when someone puts in a piece of evidence, it's considered 100% true and 100% relevant until someone combats it.
But who determines the percentages?
It's always 100%
No,
until someone
well,
attacks
I'm
it.
jumping to the next step. So when someone adds something that, counters and brings it down from 100 to say 50%, who determines that it's 50% versus 95% defeated?
So it's just by a formula.
Which formula though? Like, how does that work?
Well, okay, so if you had two pieces of evidence that you judged both the same, just as truthful and just as likely, but one's pro and one's con, what would you judge it as? If you come into a situation, you have no other context.
I think I see what you're saying. So I think, sorry, so I'm not answering your question because I am going to do the tricky thing, which is
That's
to say,
fine.
I have to see the evidence. Like I'm not sure that I think.
No,
of a-
that's no. You can't see the evidence. You don't even see the text.
Okay, well, I mean, if
You
you
can't
really
do a
want to,
formula.
so say
It's
that again.
the
There's
point
two
is that
pieces of
you have to,
evidence I
it's
think
a
are
tabula
both-
rasa. It's a person that has no context, because all it is tracking where the debate is right now. So the important thing is that someone makes a claim, we can't just dismiss it. We have to, if we don't want it, if we say it's not true, we need to say why. So
Mhm.
that's one of the core things that this forces into the situation. It's like, yeah, you can think of why it's not true, but tell us. Don't just say it's 50%. Tell us why it's 50%. So it has to start out at 100% true.
I think I see what you're saying. So you're forcing people to assume, like, well, people, they can maybe gauge their own values on evidence like that you allow them to decide. But once they've made that determination, you want the actual way that plays out in arguments to then be formulaic. And if they
Oh.
don't like the way that plays out, well, then maybe they would have to adjust their estimation of the evidence. But then you have to ask them, wait, are you just
So
doing
no,
that to
even
the system?
the estimation of the evidence works under that way. So the system, it's not what the person thinks. This is what the system thinks. So the system assumes it's true. And if you know a reason why may not be true, then you have to put it into the system.
I'm not,
Otherwise
okay,
it won't
we
be
have
in
to see
there.
some examples because there's definitely like, I'm curious how that bottoms out because there are things that I consider sort of evidentiary atoms in the sense that I just don't see a way to get more info and they are not 100% or one way or the other. It's like, okay, this particular info, I gauge it like this percentage.
So
I
I
mean,
would
it
say
may be a perfect-
that's a problem with more of a lack of imagination than a hard reality fact.
Okay, I mean, eventually we're gonna end up with physics. So I'm trying to think, okay, what are some like physical, quantum situations? I mean, okay,
If I end
this
up
is
with
getting
a
kind of-
debate about school board ethics, I mean, school board should close the street and we get into quantum ethics and quantum measurements, then we're having a problem.
I mean, but that's what you have to do. Like, if you require people to justify down to the lowest possible denominator, epistemologically, in order to achieve realistic
No, because
percentages
it's
at
the
these derived
opposite way
values.
around. It's assumed true. If you were assuming false and you had to put evidence to increase it, then it would be that way. But in this case, it just goes down till people stop disagreeing.
Okay, maybe I'm
So
missing
if two people agree that it's 100% or 50%, then they can put in the reasons for it and it's fine.
But if you disagree, then like someone puts in the support and then someone will critique that support or put in another critique at the same level as the support was, and then that's when the percentages are like mixed.
Yeah, then someone critiques it. And then it makes it usually false if there's just one counter example, because there's no evidence for it. So then you have to find some evidence for it. And then it's at 50%. And then you keep going back and forth until you reach a number that no one can find any reason to debate.
What just happened with the slider up there? Did you move that or did it move?
This is just a YouTube video. I could pull it up, but it's quicker to show the video. So the slider this is an old UI. So the more to the right is the more truthful it is, and the more to the left, the less truthful. So this is the concept of the city deciding whether they're going to close a street, right? So then the scale here is, does it benefit? Is it disadvantageous to do it, or is it unknown, is in the middle? And then so it just starts out, oh, it's assumed true. We go ahead and put a pro in there. It's like, oh, the whole reason we want to put it a pedestrian street is because foot traffic.
Well, in the middle should be like equal, not a benefit, not a disadvantage. Unknown's a different axis, right?
Yeah, but in this case, it really kind of more often means unknown.
Hmm.
Most of
Unknown
the
as in,
time,
like, we don't know if it's good or bad because there's
because
some
it could
good and some
could
bad.
be, and this is one of the problems. It could be the fact that we know it's not good and not bad, or it could be that we don't know if it's good or not bad, and there's no distinction in this system right now. So it depends on what your question is.
I mean, in this case, let's imagine, half the people really like driving and half the people really like walking. So it's very well known that half the people are going to like the change and half the people are not going to like the change. But it's basically a 50%. Let's assume that their utility from the change is identical, like, what I mean? Like, so this is assuming a utilitarian measurement. It's very well known that it's a 50-50 wash as far as utility.
Yeah, so if you have that data, you may
change.
change this label to say balanced or something else. But that's
Okay.
not how these people in this example were debating it.
Mhm.
So yeah, you could change the wording. It doesn't, you know what I'm saying? That's a word. It's not, doesn't
Okay.
have anything to do with the math.
Okay.
It's how
gotcha.
it depends on what your question is and what you're talking about on what these words will be.
Well, but it does bring up the question about relevance, though, right? I mean, how does this handle the questions of truth versus relevance?
Well, there's difference between the relevance of the final answer and the relevance within the system. So the final answer, whether it's relevance or not, could change depending on the question you're asking. That's the concept. Like if this is in the middle of the score, we could decide, oh, we don't know, or we could, and we need to do more research, or we could decide we do know and we know. Well, if you have to take an action one way or the other and it's in the middle, that's something a tool can't help you with. But in this case, it's not like we're just voting to see. This isn't a utility-based discussion. So in this case, they someone points out that it's going to send traffic down residential streets. So right now you have these two opposing values, right? One is the shops will get more foot traffic, right? And then the other thing is that you're going to have more cars down in residential streets. So right now it's kind of at unknown. The system's not helpful. You could also say, because you can't really say that we know we don't want to do it or we know we do want to do it.
Okay.
But that besides, whichever way you say it, if this is all the information you have and you don't care more about children than money, then that's the score, the system, a tabula rasa person with no concept of what's going on would score it. So if
the
that's
scores are
wrong,
entirely based on the number of those supports.
it's no,
And all the way down, like the recursive sort of.
Yes, there's a bit of a nuance on there that you could affect relevance rather than truth. or confidence. And there's also the fact of where you position things will change how the score goes up. But yeah, in general, the score is based on the evidence you've put it, of the placement
quantity.
of the nodes in the system.
Well, so if the first purple support is, it'll make this is, and you have to just allow me, it's completely hypothetical, but the first one is something very mild, like it'll make things nicer. And the first, negative orange thing is it'll, cause a nuclear explosion, eliminating all life with a high likelihood. And people may not have much more to say about that. They'll just say, yeah, those are both true.
Don't
Like,
you think that they would say, oh, this is more important than that one?
wait, how can they do that? Because
But
there's
they
no,
add a,
they're
they add
only-
a relevance claim.
so what's that? Maybe I missed what the relevance claim is.
Well, we didn't get to it.
Okay.
But we talked about you can affect relevance. So in this case, we say child safety is more important than local shops profit.
Okay, yeah, right.
And so
Okay.
now it's like, oh, we shouldn't do it.
But what if it's so like that moved it a little bit because I think there's a little more orange. But I mean, what if this is just such a strong difference that, you kind of don't need to go into it. It's just clear that one is so much worse than the other.
And
If the-
that's clearly missing, yes.
Well, okay,
You
but there's
split
two
the
ways you can do it.
sentence.
One is you can add an infinite number of things down here. Two is you can
But
have it
now you-
affect the
but
truth.
hold on, hold on. So let's stop with that one. Because that was something I didn't get to bring up. Like, to some degree, I don't know, again, the goal of the system, but if it's intended to be open to a large group of people.
No, we're not considering that yet.
Okay, I was gonna say, like, you don't want it to just be amenable to sock puppeting or like overwhelming, the loudest voice wins. Like, and that
No,
kind
but
of
every
seems-
system has that problem.
No,
There's
well,
different
every
ways to
system has
solve
that
it, but-
potential for that problem, but every system has, different solutions or in
Different
the end, and I
potentials,
don't
right,
see the
yeah.
solution here.
No, and that's because that's not the piece I'm focusing on.
Okay, yeah.
But there are lots of things you can do to prevent that. It's just has nothing to do with how the math works.
Okay, so sorry, I cut you off. You're saying you can add an infinite number of supports and that would
Well,
give you
no,
X
I
over
was
the other.
exaggerating. I mean, you could add several more to make sure they weigh. You can
Right.
discount this one, saying this one's less important in order to have that discussion. The other thing to do is, if it's an infinite one like nuclear or catastrophic risk, 100% chance of catastrophic risk. First of all, you wouldn't be having a debate about that. There,
Cheating.
I mean, that's an edge case. I don't
Well, but the
care
people may
to
disagree
try-
on the
try and-
percentages.
complicate my system to handle stuff like that. But this is enough to say in most cases, you're just going to want to say this is more relevant than that one, or more important and this one's less important than that one. And so you have a way to put these in there. And the more you add, the more irrelevant or relevant it becomes.
Oh, is that a relevance claim? The child safety is more important?
Yeah, the UI
it-
on this isn't great on showing that.
Does it have is there like a special type to that orange? Like it's a different type, or is the fact that it's sort of nested underneath, that just means it is a relevance claim?
No, there's no visual indication on this UI, whether it's relevance or truth. I found when explaining it to people, unless it's someone like this group, they don't even think of that. They just know, hey, here's a reason why it's more important, and I expect that number to go down.
Mhm.
And they're happy with that directionally correct information. And I can show you in Reason Score how it actually looks. But then when we talk about or debating that children claim, so in this example, they repurpose some railroad tracks to put in a new street right next door. So now the traffic doesn't go into the residential areas. And so that completely counters that claim. I mean, someone could say, oh, it doesn't solve the problem, and you can have that debate. But right now, where the debate is right now, before anything else has been added, that makes this this claim false. So now there's nothing holding it back. I guess we lost Carl.
Oh,
Got heated up and had to go.
no.
Yeah, network issue, I'm sure.
Mm.
Yeah, I need to find a
Nice.
better explanation of this. Although I should have just told Carl to go watch the video and see what he thought.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying about, hey, truth relevance is hard to explain. It's kind of necessary because, we'll get people to input data in there. If they input it inappropriately, it changes the calculations.
Yeah, and this explainer is for your first introduction, and so they're not going to be inputting
Fair
data
enough.
without more training. And if you get too complicated too quick, people eyes glaze over.
That
And
is
a good
fair.
portion of the people won't ever understand the difference between relevance and truth.
That is totally believable. Yes.
So
But
Carl, I think we stopped when you disappeared, but I don't
the
know
rest now.
if you want to.
Oh, sorry.
Reset where
My
you were.
computer didn't tell me that it was dying and then it died, so I don't know what's going on.
So yeah, I don't know if you want to. I was kind of at the end of a point.
I don't agree that most people won't. I forget your exact wording, but won't appreciate the difference between truth and relevance. I think most people don't think in those terms because they don't have any reason to in conversation. But I think most people who are shown the difference will be like, oh yeah, I can see that. I mean, they may continue not to worry in those terms because they're thinking pragmatically in any argument, and so they switch between truth and relevance
They
as
do it
needed. But
intuitively in the
yeah,
discussion.
but I
They
think
just don't
most
label it.
people would get the idea if it's shown like, oh, there is this distinction.
Yeah,
They just may
the
they may
main
ask, why do I care? Is
right.
it going to help me win my argument or not? But
Yeah.
I think
So anyways, yeah, as you keep adding things, you can it adjusts the score, and the trick is that so this does two things. Is it fixes the kind of memory issue where people, well, it fixes three things. One is like memory, because people are doing this kind of weighing in their own head, but they have a lot of unspoken assumptions about all these things. Like everyone has an intuitive impression of children's risk of being run over versus the profit of the thing. It's like that's not exactly 0% for everyone. But they're not expressing it. And so this puts it in the system to where, hey, you have to kind of put something in there to express it. And then people aren't dismissed where they just say something and no one ever counters it, and everyone one side forgot about it and the other side didn't. So they leave the debate with two different decisions because of cognitive bias, or two different opinions. So this is just kind of keeping track of what people said and where how that statement in theory could impact the thing. Anyways,
I was just gonna say that this view, I think this view makes it more clear why the like flow visual is important, because it's like
because of how bad
hard to
this was.
tell. Well, it's just hard to tell like where the value or the like supports. Like you're not going to average in your head all the children's like dials or whatever. So the like visual river thing makes it easier to track down like, oh, am I missing a critique somewhere?
Yeah.
Yeah. But also what Marc-Antoine said earlier about like showing the both rivers, just like rather than canceling one out, does also seem relevant now, because if you're showing both, you know that there are critiques already to this, or like as opposed to like there just aren't critiques yet. Like if you're looking for, because I guess in the buildup of this like tree, my first thought is like, what's missing? Where if I feel like this is actually wrong and this says it's like 80% true or whatever, like where am I supposed to go to like find the piece that I think is missing? And like if you just collapse it all without showing the other side, then it's like maybe harder to get to those missing pieces. Is it because it's so simplified?
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge of what to show when. And what's good about this also is that you could just look at this and say, oh, this is a lot of purple here, a lot of orange here, and this one's kind of a faded orange. So I'm like, okay, I think orange is not as strong as it should be. So let me look down here and see
Mm.
what's wrong with, or like, oh, so what's great about it is you could just look at the next level down. You don't have to look at the whole tree and just say, which of these scores do I agree with? Oh, this one, the numbers are wrong in this, by the way. But
There, and this is why I was a bit like, do we want the orange to be there? Do we want the orange not to be there? Because it does convey that it still transmits falsehood to the consequence, which is not true. So I'm not sure. On the other hand, yeah, what you do want is for your system to be such that people don't have to dig down to know how A impacts B. Like the state of A is self-contained. Anything that fed into A has, okay, here's the status of A. Now, I do think the status of A has to be more complex than that, personally. But I agree totally with the goal of saying we want people to look at, okay, this is the status of A, here's how it impacts B. And the status of A, I don't have to look into it because unless I care to argue for or against it, I can just, it's the status is self-contained. That's important. For me, because I'm thinking social truth, I was always thinking there would be, this is how many people believe, how many people disbelieve. And that's two-sided.
yeah, I think there's definite value in that, and all the different ways you've talked about, like knowing this is a contentious question. And it's a hard cognitive leap for someone to look at this and say, oh, this is wrong, and then be able to express why it's wrong.
Yes.
So it'd be good to have the thing where to know where people are, saying this doesn't work and I don't know what to do. But I'm just choosing to like delay that till later, till I get this other stuff figured out. But I definitely think there's a value in that.
Yeah, and I haven't worked on the visuals of it for a long time, and I totally believe in it's important. It needs to be done because, yeah, this whole getting a synthetic view is valuable. I do believe in that.
Another thing is when I add that in there, I'm afraid people will think that the score is based on, because voting is such a common thing in this space, that they'll think their votes are actually changing the score. And it would change one score, it just wouldn't change the other. Like there's kind of a popularity is the wrong term, but you know what I mean? People's
I do.
opinion. And then there's kind of like, here's the calculated based on what's been added so far.
My main concern with this, as always, is that when people realize what they do have impact, what they will be doing is, oh, then I have to add something here, and they'll game it, right? They'll go, here's the kind of nonsense. Here is where I have to add stuff. It doesn't have to be valid, invalid. Like there'll be bullshit jamming.
Yeah.
On a large scale. That's on the other. That's probably unavoidable, but
unless if you're curating it.
Well, there's a lot of ways to kind of like, there's a lot of not good ways. There's a lot of potential ways of when you open up a system like that to combat that. I mean, in this one, it's a game where each side takes a turn. So you're not going to be able to spam the system because the other side gets a turn between your turns. So you could either, so your goal in that case is to put in the most valuable.
Is it turn-based?
In this use of the system where it's a debate thing, you're allowed to put in one claim.
Interesting.
Actually, I should probably show you all the script for the video. Which will take me a second to find. So this is the debate. Oh yeah, that's it actually. So I have these numbered with the move, and it's a little misleading right now. So this is about keto. This is what Michael's doing.
Yeah.
This is the research for this for me. So move 1 is like the pro side. The pro is keto diet does not cause heart attacks is the main claim, and that's badly phrased. But to some extent, it's kind of like I can eat as much fatty meat as I want. I'm not going to die of a heart attack because of that. Anyway, so the first claim the other side might say is it increases ApoB. And then the other side comes up and says insulin is oxidizing and keto. I mean, so we're not putting the complete explanatory text. These are just short phrases to remind us of what each claim is.
Yep.
And then move 3, and I could stop going through this at any time if you want, is like there's some studies that show that keto has protective role in vascular functions. Where's 4? So the con side says saturated fats correlate with increased risk of cardiovascular disease. 5, we say it's protective, like antioxidant. And here's where one of the interesting things happens in the game is that the other side comes up and says, hey, these are saying kind of the same thing.
No.
Antioxidant and oxidizing. And so
Well, you
There's-
could be oxidizing something other than insulin.
right, but you have to look in the studies to see what they meant, because oftentimes people will say it's an antioxidant when really they mean there's less oxidizing compounds, or maybe they don't even know that term is not in medical studies. The terms they use are not specific.
Well, of
Anyway,
course,
they're related.
Antioxidant is a generic chemical concept. Of course, it's the redox operation. You're acting on the
Yeah, but in
Bowel-
medical thing, they're not, when they say it's an antioxidant,
yeah.
a lot of times they're saying we showed the oxidative stress went down when we did this intervention.
Yeah.
They're not making a claim that chemically it's because there was an antioxidant in the system. It could be because we're introducing less oxidizing compounds in the system. They're
Well-
calling it an antioxidant incorrectly because it's not actually an antioxidant. It's reducing the amount of oxidizing agents you're putting in the system.
But wouldn't the numbers control for that? I mean, if people consume substance A, which is the substance or study, and some of them will still consume oxidizing compounds also, some people won't. You're not, unless you're also telling them, it won't be long.
Yeah, it's 4.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. Unless you're also telling them, don't consume this other oxidizing thing, some of them will, some of them won't. So if the thing reduces, if compound A reduces oxidization, it has an you cannot say that it reduces the oxidizing substance consumption. It seems to compensate for it. No.
That would be the logical way of doing it.
Yeah.
Medical studies do not use correct terminology, and they often say things they don't mean. So, but it doesn't, the nuances doesn't matter so much. So we could go into that specific claim, but I'd rather just, I don't know.
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
y'all
Yeah.
wanna
And
continue talking
yes.
about. Anyways, so we introduced this kind of main claim that groups these together. And then, they bring up this another study. And then
Does
don't know.
your just
they're
out of
going back and
curiosity,
forth, and the score is changing as they go back and forth.
does your UI have like a easy way of adding a parent claim that like combines the two children claims? And
No.
okay.
Now the way I'm going to be doing
seems-
this is that the code I have right now is kind of message based. And so I'm going to have like a button that I can click that'll send the next message into it. And so I will probably I have a way I can force the IDs in there, so I'm gonna put the things on there, and I think I'm gonna use the new browser transition page. Is it the new view transition, and the browser will move the things around appropriately. Have you heard of that?
No.
It just came out. So view transition, it's a really cool thing. You can just say, here's some HTML, here's another HTML, and you could say, and if things move, the browser will animate them for you.
Huh.
As long as
How
it's
does it-
figured out. If it can't,
How does
it'll
it
just
figure out? How does it figure out which things correspond to each other?
if their IDs match in both
So it
HTML.
uses IDs.
Mhm.
IDs. I was thinking it would be cool to have something like that for the React Flow that I'm using. I like relay out, but like it just like there's no transition. So if the
Right.
layout changes, it just like flashes the nodes in a
Yeah.
different position. And if there was like an automatic transition.
So yeah, check out view transitions. It should work with React Flow. I haven't done it, but I'm going to play with it and get it moving. So
That's really interesting. I do need to look into that.
anyways, that's kind of the script, and we'll see how, if I actually get around to making a video. It'll just be recording myself doing a talk over of, oh, then this happened, then this happened.
Nice.
Hmm.
Okay. I unfortunately cannot stay on. I do notice you have an interesting visual representation of relevance here, as opposed to a position.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to have the attacks come out front. And this is another kind of potential visualization where it's squeezing. There's a problem with visualizing. I cannot in web tech, I can't make this darker line. It has to be dead center. It can't be like you can't create two parallel lines of the same color and a
I
nice
understand.
Bayesian
Fair enough.
line. So I was trying to visualize, how do I have it squeeze it to the center? Anyways.
Not bad. This works. I think the R is even better in some ways, but the R could become confusing with a lot if there's a lot of attacks.
Yeah.
Because there'll be a lot of in and out, and what's coming out, which is the out of all the, the squeezer is really interesting as a representation. Also, it forces perpendicularity. Like, frankly, if you kept the R, but forced perpendicularity in the same way you did with the squeezer, it would work quite well.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Certainly the perpendicularity contributes a lot.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. These ideas did not include, what if you have 3 attacks and 4, right? And so when I did that, like, oh, so I went back to an old idea. But later when I get the math all kind of figured out, I'll look at putting them external and some before the other and see.
Yeah.
We'll play with it. Cool. Well, I guess we've talked for an hour anyways.
Yes.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
For presenting.
Ciao, ciao.
See ya.